Hello. Tonight's book is An Evening at Alfie's. One cold winter evening, Alfie and his little sister Annie Rose were all ready for bed. Mum and Dad were all ready to go out, and Mrs. McNally's Maureen was in the living room. She'd come to look after Alfie and Annie Rose while Mum and Dad went to a party. Alfie and Maureen waved goodbye to them from the window. Annie Rose was already in her cot. Soon she settled down and went to sleep. Alfie liked Maureen. She always read him a story when she came to babysit. And tonight Alfie wanted a story about Noah and his ark full of animals. Alfie liked to hear about how the rain came drip, 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 and then splash, 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 and then rushing everywhere until the whole world was covered with water. When Maureen had finished the story, it was time for Alfie to go to bed, and she came upstairs to tuck him up. They had to be very quiet and talk in whispers in case they woke up Annie Rose. Maureen gave Alfie a good-night hug and went off downstairs, leaving the door a little bit open. Alfie didn't feel sleepy. He lay in bed looking at a patch of light on the ceiling. For a long time all was quiet, and then he heard a funny noise outside in the landing. Alfie sat up. The noise was just outside his door. Drip, drip, drip. Soon it got quicker, and it changed to drip, 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 drip. And it was getting louder too. Alfie got out of bed and peeked round the door, and there was a puddle on the floor. He looked up. Water was splashing into the puddle from the ceiling. Drip, 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 drip. It was raining inside the house. Alfie went downstairs, and Maureen was doing her homework in front of the TV. "It's raining on the landing," Alfie told her. Alfie and Maureen went back upstairs, and the puddle was getting bigger. The drip, 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 drip had turned into a splash, 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 splash. Looks like a burst pipe," said Maureen. A plumber was one of those things that she wanted to be when she left school. "Better get a bucket," she said. So Alfie showed her where the bucket was kept in the kitchen cupboard with the brushes and the brooms. But now the water was dripping down in another place. Alfie and Maureen found two of Mum's big mixing bowls and put them underneath the drips. Maureen got on the telephone to her mum. The McNallys lived just across the street, and Mrs. McNally was there in a moment. Oh dear, it's ruining your mother's floor," said Mrs. McNally. "Fetch some more floorcloths, Maureen." Just then Annie Rose woke up and she began to cry. "Shh, shh, there," said Mrs. McNally, bending over her cot. But Annie Rose only looked at her and cried louder. Mrs. McNally ran back into the landing. She and Maureen tried to mop up the water, but now the drips were coming down in lots of different places. Splash, splash, splash! "We ought to turn the water off from the mains," said Maureen, "but I don't know how to do it. I think you better fetch your dad." So while she was gone, Mrs. McNally mopped and emptied brimming bowls, and in between mopping and emptying she ran to comfort Annie Rose. But Annie Rose went on crying and crying, and the drips on the landing came faster and faster. Now there were lots of puddles on the floor. Alfie paddled in them for a while. It was quite fun, but the water was very cold, and he thought that soon perhaps the whole street would be covered with water, and they'd have to float away in a boat, just like Noah's Ark. Soon Maureen came running upstairs with Mr. McNally close behind her, wearing his bedroom slippers. "What's all this then?" said Mr. McNally, looking at the water pouring down. He put his head around the bedroom door. He and Annie Rose were old friends. Dear, what's all this?" he said in a very kind voice. And then he went downstairs and found a large sort of tap under the stairs, and he turned it off just like that. "So that's where it is," said Maureen. Then the water stopped pouring down through the ceiling, splash, 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 and became a drip, 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 and then a drip, 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 and then it stopped altogether. "Thank goodness for that," said Mrs. McNally. "I know how to do it next time," said Maureen, but Annie Rose was still crying. Alfie went into the bedroom to see if he could cheer her up. Tears were rolling down her cheeks and soaking into her blanket. "Don't cry, Annie Rose," said Alfie, and he put his hand through the bars of her cot and patted her gently, as he'd seen Mum do sometimes. Annie Rose still wore nappies at night. "Annie Rose is wet," Alfie told everyone, "and her bed's wet too. I expect that's why she was crying." "Why, so she is, poor little mite," said Mrs. McNally. "Everybody's wet in that house." When Annie Rose was all dry and comfortable again, Mrs. McNally put her on the living room sofa with Alfie and tucked a quilt around them both, and then she gave them both a biscuit. Annie Rose was quite cheerful now, and she got very friendly with Mr. McNally, and he let her play a game with him, taking off his glasses and putting them on again. And then she sucked her thumb, and she leant against Alfie, and Alfie leant against her. When Mum and Dad came home, they were both fast asleep on the sofa. Next morning, Mum told Alfie not to turn on the taps until the plumber had been to mend the burst pipe. Alfie didn't mind not having a wash. He'd had enough water the night before, enough to last a very long time. Goodness me, that would have been an exciting night, wouldn't it? Water coming out of the ceiling. You go to sleep now. Night-night.